Justin Haskins is in the studio with us. He co-wrote the book, The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism with Glenn Beck. It's glensnewbook.com where you can find that. Now, Justin, he's the director of the Socialism Center at the Heartland Institute. And so you've been tracking the Great Reset for quite a while now. You know what time it is, and you have so much information to share, important information to share, that people, you got to get this book. It is chock full of stuff that you got to warn others about.
Right, yeah.
Tell us in a nutshell, if someone is at work today and they've got they want to talk about the Great Reset or something, how do they? What's a quick little overview for them?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. What's the elevator pitch for it?
Pitch.
One of the reasons why the Great Reset is such a crazy topic is because there are so many conspiracy theories surrounding it and so many factually incorrect things about it that people have turned it into something that it actually isn't. What it is in reality is scary enough. You don't need to invent things to make it scarier.
Right.
The sort of overarching thing is the Great Reset is a proposal by international elites to transform the global economy. The Great Reset slogan, which started in the middle of 2020, sort of at the height of the pandemic, rolled out by the World Economic Forum, Prince Charles, a bunch of other international institutions at this huge event that they hosted. That's their language. And it alludes to pushing the reset button on the economy. That's the idea behind it. So how do they plan to do that? There are two main components to it. All right. The first is big, gigantic socialist type programs. There's really nothing, we could talk about the Green New Deal if you want. I spent much of my life talking about the Green New Deal. But I think everybody who's listening to this knows what that is, right? Single payer healthcare, federal jobs guarantee type stuff, but not just in America, in Europe and all over the world, okay? That's one half of it.
Okay.
The other half, the really interesting part of it, I think, is how they want to rework the economy in conjunction with these big social programs. What they want to do is roll out something that they call stakeholder capitalism. It's really not capitalism. Stakeholder means collective, essentially. So collectivist capitalism is the phrase.
Change the language.
Right, change the language. And the idea behind it is let's build a framework that requires big, gigantic corporations, banks, and others operating within the economy to behave in the way that we want them to at a micro level. So, how do we get companies to go woke, basically? Why are we seeing all these companies do that? There are lots of theories behind it, but I think that the biggest overarching reason is because they're part of this whole Great Reset movement. And there are specific reasons why you see companies have these really crazy diversity programs where they're basically teaching all white people are racist, why they have, why all of a sudden they care about climate change. Every single company in the universe cares about climate change. Why does Coca-Cola care about climate change? Why is American Airlines and companies like that working on concerned with policies related to election integrity and stuff? What does that have to do with them? Why do they care? Because it's all part of this movement. And so the way the framework works, a sort of short overview of how it works, is they have something called ESG scores. It's like a social credit system, all right, where you literally get awarded as a company of dozens and dozens of metrics based on how woke you are, basically, okay?
Wow.
And based on your score, investors and governments, depending on what country you're in, and that can vary from place to place, award you or punish you depending on how woke you are. They already have something like this in China for both individual citizens and for companies. And in the Great Reset scheme, it's sort of their Western version of the China model. And it's already in place. The vast majority of companies have
China
ESG
was going to be
scores.
connected to this.
China's always connected to it.
With everything.
Yeah, it's true.
By the way, this is the longest elevator ride of my life.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
I know.
Kidding.
And and that's why people have to buy the book.
Right, absolutely.
No,
This topic, the Great Reset, Glenn has covered a lot of serious stuff. I think we can all agree he has covered some very important topics. He calls this and I made sure to write this down. This, he has said, is the most important thing that he's ever covered. And I don't think this is Glenn Beck hyperbole. This right here is generation changing. This is going to screw up the future for your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, and beyond. In fact, the book even opens up in the year like 2040. The person listening to this, the American listening to this, what does their country look like in just those 18 years from now?
Right.
Just in a just a general sense as to what everyday life is going to be like.
So there's lots of people involved with the Great Reset who have sort of written about what they think is happening to the world and how they think that we need to control it and what it should look like. And I think the biggest takeaway from that, there are many things that you could point to, but sort of the biggest phrase of the Great Reset that you hear all the time is that within 10 to 20 years, the average person will own nothing and will have no privacy, and they will be happy. They'll be happy with not owning anything and with having no privacy. Now, why would we be happy in a world like that? Because what they say is, well, we'll become a society of renters. We'll rent everything. No. You don't need a car. You can just get an Uber, right? You don't need a house. You can just rent from some gigantic conglomerate that will get. And so everything can become a sort of you rent it from some big giant corporation. So you could see why the corporations are all in favor of this.
So should that be a red flag? Is that something we're going to start seeing the phrase stakeholder capitalism pop up everywhere?
Oh, I mean, you can find, if you just did a search on stakeholder capitalism, you'll see that has been something these people have been talking about for literally 30 or 40 years. They've tried on numerous occasions to try to promote these ideas. And for the most part, the people that you really need to make this work, big corporations, big banks, some government officials and things like that have kind of been resistant to it because they were making lots of money in the other way of doing things, so they didn't need to do this. But once they started printing trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars and pumping it into the financial system and circulating it around these big corporations with these big investors like BlackRock and others, and people started getting rich, what happened was they essentially went to these people and they said, look, if you want this money train to keep going, then you gotta spend responsibly. You gotta make sure that you're being sustainable. You gotta play by our rules. And so all these big investors, all these big Wall Street firms, like BlackRock, which has added trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to its portfolio in just the past 5 years, trillions of dollars. These big banks, all of these people are getting filthy rich off of this. It's why you saw the stock market go up significantly in the middle of the worst global financial collapse in history. It's why real estate prices have gone up significantly in one of the worst economic crashes in history. Millions of people lost their jobs and all these things went up. Why? Because the system is being flooded with this cheap cash that's being printed. And they're trying to come up with rules to make sure that the people who are getting rich off of all of this are going along with these left-wing causes as a condition of getting that money.
Right. We're talking with Justin Haskins here on Pat Gray Unleashed. He co-wrote the book, came out yesterday, The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism. He co-authored that with Glenn Beck, glensnewbook.com. Let's go around the room. I know Eric's got a question. Jill's got a question. You probably have tons of questions over there. What do you got here?
Well,
for
I think what I want to ask, because I know you have kind of a background much in kind of studying the impacts of socialism, particularly state socialism. When I've talked about this Great Reset idea, I think that's been my primary emphasis, is the socialistic aspect and how kind of socialism and state socialism being kind of the means to accomplish really what it is that they're attempting to do and what it is that they kind of believe in with this Great Reset. Do you think that part of it is the core issue? I don't want to say issue, but core aspect, or rather core vehicle of the Great Reset per se, is the emphasis or the hyper-emphasis of using these sort of state socialistic, kind of alluded to it earlier, state socialistic, be it programs, as that vehicle to accomplish this? Do you think that's it? That's the
right.
ticket?
So I think that it's an important part of it, to be sure, but I don't think it's the primary emphasis.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because, as we just saw with what happened in Congress with Build Back Better and all this stuff, it's really hard, it turns out, to pass socialist programs in Congress. It's not easy to do. And our system in America, our Constitution, has been thwarting a lot of different socialist attempts for a very, very long time because you can't just change the Constitution. It's easier in Europe to do these things, but it's really hard in the United States. So one of the primary reasons why they're so interested in creating this whole new version of capitalism, as they describe it, is because they wanted to come up with a way to impose leftist ideas, to change the culture, change society, change what you can buy and sell and what you can say online and all of this stuff without actually having to pass a law.
Yeah.
That's the genius of it. So you don't need a socialist program. All you need is all of the corporations to say, we're not going to let you say certain things. We're not going to let you buy certain things. We're not going to let you go to certain places. If they're all doing that, and you tie that with a movement toward we don't own anything, well, then we're living by their rules, essentially, right? Now you don't even need socialism. You have centralized planning, centralized control without the collective ownership and management of the property directly. So the primary difference between this and true socialism would be that part of it. It's the collective ownership part. This is not a call for collective ownership or management of property. That's the reason why you don't see AOC and Bernie Sanders waving the Great Reset flag, because they want collective ownership and management of property. These people don't. They want to control the property themselves. So this is more of a sort of elitist, globalist kind of movement. It's more in the line of a George Soros and early progressive era type Woodrow Wilson, controlled by the elites, than it is, say, like Karl Marx or Bernie Sanders or someone in that vein.
Yeah.
With COVID, we saw all of the big businesses got to stay open, but the mom and pop shops had to shut down, right? You look at America, you look at the fabric of the workforce, and there are so many entrepreneurs and small businesses. You talk about ESG scores, and the corporations are going to continue to take over. So what does that do for small businesses and the entrepreneurs in America?
Right. I think that what we've seen since the pandemic rolled out, and this is why they were so, they've been pushing these kinds of ideas for a long time, but the pandemic gave them an opportunity that they didn't have. In fact, they used the phrase, it's a golden opportunity to change the world, right? And that all of the closing of all these mom and pop shops, the consolidation of wealth in the hands of a few, the vast amounts of money printing like we've talked about before, all of these policies make it easier to control the system, because all you have to do is to get, it's so much, if you have tens and thousands or hundreds of thousands of small businesses in a single country, to try to get them all to go along with something is impossible. They won't do it. But if you can control their banks and say, well, you can only bank with certain people, if you can control the corporations, and the corporations control most of the economy, there's a lot fewer of those people running things. So it's easier to manage the system. And that's what they're doing. What they're trying to do is consolidate wealth and power to the point where it's manageable to control it without actually having to pass a law that controls it, right? So that was a big part of it. A huge part of it is the small business owner being destroyed, because again, you can't, and you saw this with the pandemic. We saw gym owners say, screw you, I don't care what the law is, I'm staying open. We saw people, there were businesses where I live, which is in a super liberal place, who basically, they put the signs up on the doors that you had to do X, Y, or Z or whatever, but then they didn't actually do any of those things, right? And so, and we saw this everywhere, right? Yeah. But with big corporations, they were more than happy to go along with everything. They're still pushing for a lot of this stuff because they're all getting rich off of it, and they want to make sure that they are in good with the right people.
Business in good standing.
Exactly, because they want access to that cheap capital. That's the bottom line. And they get to tell everybody and all of their friends at Davos cocktail parties and elsewhere that they're helping to save the world, and they have this great savior complex, And when you read what these people say, I mean, they're the most egotistical group of people on the face of the planet.
Right. You just walked into my next question. I was going to say, Justin, tell us, what is Davos and why should people be aware of that? And second question is, tell us who Klaus Schwab is and why should people be aware of who he is? So 2 of them for you there.
Right. So Davos is a place in Switzerland. It's a ski resort, a very elaborate ski resort. Every year, the World Economic Forum, which has been around for a very long time, decades and decades and decades, hosts an event at Davos. And it's now just become Davos is the event, right? And essentially, this is an event for the elite from all over the world. Corporations, businesses, government, they all get together and they talk about how they're going to save the world. That's how they sell it, right? How can we save the world? Really what it is, in reality, is an opportunity for these people to get together and talk, sort of plan how they want to move things forward. And that has manifested itself in a bunch of different ways. But the Great Reset was really birthed out of Davos.
Right.
And Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum and is one of the most influential people in the world, literally wrote the book about the Great Reset, talking about why we needed to do this and why it was important. And he's been pushing for this idea of stakeholder capitalism and resetting the global economy for decades and decades and decades. And so the reason why the World Economic Forum matters and the reason why Davos matters is not because they actually have any control directly over anyone. They don't. They're not a government or something. But they are they're sort of the space where all of these people can get together and frankly plan how they're going to operate, what they're going to do, how the world is going to look. And I know that sounds really conspiratorial, but I mean, all you got to do is go to their website and read the stuff that they post there. They're very open about how they want to change the entire world, blow up the global economy, reset everything. I mean, I have a mountain of quotes, and you can find them in the book where it's very clearly illustrated what they're doing. And so that's why Davos matters. It matters because the things that they do at Davos ultimately become the policies of these corporations and banks and governments for decades into the future.
Yeah. So do you think that with the centralization of money, I mean, you're not going to find any shortage of libertarians kind of rally against that, be it the Treasury or the Federal Reserve, most definitely, or the central banking system. But do you think that, I know in the last decade or so, definitely speeding up in the last couple of decades, you've seen kind of this people becoming more privy to the idea of these decentralized monies. Do you think that is going to be a useful effort in kind of staving this off and trying because you mentioned with the kind of inflationary issues and how that has lined up big massive corporate entities and the banks because they're 40% of the money supply was printed in the last year or right. Something insane like that. But be it, and I'm not just referring to Bitcoin and ideas like that, but do you think that is kind of at least an effort, if not to halt it, to kind of let's say slow it down at least in some capacity to push for this great reset? Is this kind of people focusing more on decentralized money that's not attached, let's say, right. to them?
Yeah, so the Great Reset does not work without central banks having control over money, because you got to print it and you got to distribute it. And the whole concept of cryptocurrency, depending on the cryptocurrency you're talking about, is to stop that from happening and to take decision-making out of it, and not totally, but centralized decision-making out of it, so that, Bitcoin, the supply of Bitcoin goes up at a certain rate, and there's really no central bank that can control that. So some cryptocurrencies absolutely would put a stop to this without a doubt. And there are some people in the cryptocurrency space who are trying to create whole new financial systems that operate outside of the existing system. Other cryptocurrencies, however, could easily be co-opted and used by the existing financial system to make their lives easier to actually ramp some of this stuff up. Because what cryptocurrency can do in a lot of cases is it can automate a lot of the decision-making processes that happen right now. So you might have thousands of employees at a bank making lending decisions and doing things like that. You can actually replace most of that with a good cryptocurrency system.
Wait, is there a book? Is there a list in the book, or is there a list somewhere you can show us? These are the good cryptos. These are the cryptos that could be
certainly
used.
not the ones that are monitoring. You aren't the ones that you want to use, but there are more private. You got like Monero and all of those that are out there that are doing exactly what it is he's saying and trying to definitely have that kind of private with not controlling the money supply, not having you basically be able to just avoid the cryptocurrencies that again is no cap on them, like what at least with Bitcoin, for example. At least with that, you don't have to run of the issue of like, there's that amount of sats, and there's not going to be ever any more. There's no increase of that money supply where other cryptos are like, we're going to make as much as we can.
Right. And so and the other thing about that is that to kind of wrap that up is that these financial institutions are trying to control it by buying it.
Yeah.
They're buying lots of it. Big Wall Street financial firms, big hedge funds, they're actually buying massive amounts of Bitcoin and of Ethereum and of other of the major cryptocurrencies. And in a way, if the government just decided, it's sort of funny. I'm not trying to give advice to the government. I don't think there's anybody from the government listening to the show. Maybe they are. I don't know. But if I was the central bank, I'd print a bunch of money and I'd buy up all the Bitcoin, because then that solves that problem. Now you control all of the Bitcoin, and you couldn't buy all of it because a lot of people wouldn't sell it. They'd hold it, but you could buy a lot of it. And now you have kind of control over it just by buying it.
We're going to be ruled by MicroStrategies. That's a separate thing. When you look at the slogan, right? You're going to own nothing and you're going to be happy. I like owning things, right? So what's the end game? If there's a glimmer of hope, what is that people can look to?
Yeah, well, I think that the glimmer of hope for when you're talking about pushing back against the Great Reset, is that most people don't want it. They don't want a great reset of the global economy. They don't think that these things are important. When you ask people, we actually just did a poll with Rasmussen that I don't even think it's actually publicly come out yet, but I just did a poll with Rasmussen and coupled with the Heartland Institute, where we asked people questions about the Great Reset. We asked people if they knew what it was. We asked people if they supported it, if they knew what it was. The majority of people said, like these were likely voters, said that they did not support it if they knew what it was. Then when we asked people questions about what the priority should be for businesses, the highest priority, we asked them about social justice causes, we asked about climate change, we asked about just making money, providing good wages for employees, things like that. And overwhelmingly, people said some kind of business-related thing. Provide me with a good service or a good product. That's what I want. Make sure your employees are being paid well. That's what I want. Only 1% said social justice causes. 1%. Wow. So even lots of Democrats, and 9% said climate change. That was the biggest sort of social justice. So together, 10% chose something like that. So people don't want it.
Right.
So figuring out a way to decentralize things is going to be the key to stopping it long term. People don't want it, so we got to figure out a strategy for making sure that we don't have to have it through some kind of a decentralization.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to your terrifying poll results of Democratic attitudes toward the unvaxxed that you talked about. If people missed it on Monday's Glenn Beck show, go back and listen to that. It's terrifying where we're headed. The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism. It's available right now, glensnewbook.com. Thanks, Justin.